Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here on Play on GAA with me, Seamus Brady, and for this I am joined by sports reporter with the 42, Sinéad Farrell. Sinead, some great games in the club championship over the weekend, two All-Ireland Club Championship semi-finals, the first between Watty Grahams Glen and Moycullen, and the other one between Kilmacud Crokes and Kerins O'Rahillys. First off, how did you enjoy both of the games? Two very similar games in a way. I mean, like, two sides in Watty Grahams Glen and Kilmacud Crokes who got the victory. They were both firmly in the driving seat going into the final quarter, and they both got nearly pulled back, but they both got over the line.
Yeah, two very similar games. This is the time of year where club championship really gets the spotlight before we start going back to the inter-county season again, and the two semi-finals over the weekend. Yeah, quite similar games. I think overall, the two best teams kind of came out on top in Glen and Kilmacud Crokes. I think probably the biggest thing out of this championship is we've seen a good few kind of breakthrough teams getting to this stage of the championship, like Glen. That their progress is a brilliant, reflection of just how well Derry have done, in the season this year, when obviously they probably would have preferred maybe a better performance in the semi-final last year, but even getting to that point was a huge plus for them. And now Glen getting to the All-Ireland final, that's a brilliant, time period for Derry football. Just to, I suppose, take that game, first, Glen just looked in control pretty much the entire way through. Anytime Moycullen were pressing, Glen seemed to have an answer for them. Now, I was working on the day, so I kind of had the games on in the background, but anytime I looked up, if Moycullen were sending a ball in, there was a Glen player there to either stand them up or fetch the ball. Conor Glass exerting his influence as he always does. He's been he's made such an impact since he's come back from Australia. And I know people have their reservations about players going over to the AFL. We have maybe the odd example of players who went over with all their ability and maybe didn't come back the same player, like say with Tommy Walsh and Kerry. He didn't quite resume his time in the team the way that he had when he left. But Conor Glass has just brought back all of that brilliant professionalism. He's been such a tower since he came back for both Derry and Glen. You saw him making a big impact in the semi-final over the weekend. Goals were crucial. Glen got theirs, I think, shortly after the start of the second half. And I just had to look back at it there. And it was just Route 1 football, for pressing the ball forward, and I think it's Tiernan Flanagan scored from a rebound. Now, Moycullen, while they were chasing the game, they were 4 points down after about 10 minutes. They were playing second fiddle for the most part, but they kept in touch right until the end, and they did have a last minute chance. Now, they probably could have done a bit better with it. I think they were closer to the goal than they would have liked if they were going to try and loft the ball in. It was probably a little bit tricky, but the way they kind of tried to play it across, they ended up just getting dispossessed, and the game just sort of petered out then. And, nothing much they could do at that point. But I think overall, Glen were the better team. Beating Kilcoo, I think that's such a bolstering result. You get such confidence from that, not just beating your provincial champions, but the All-Ireland champions as well. They will have a ton of confidence going into the final against Kilmacud Crokes, who, again, probably the better team overall. But I think they'll be a little bit concerned with how they closed out the game. I think they were 7 points up coming into the end. Kerins O'Rahillys brought it back to 3. And Kerins O'Rahillys were in the best position they could be in because nobody was giving them a chance going up to the game. And I know Tommy Walsh spoke to the media last week. I was on a press call with him. And he definitely got the sense that, we appreciate these are the All-Ireland finalists. They're the most experienced team probably of the 4 semi-finalists that are left. But we've got quality players as well, like Tommy Walsh, Barry John Keane as well, and others. And they gave them a good rattle. And to bring it back to 3 points with, time running out, again, they also had a last-minute goal chance. And again, long ball in. I think it might have been Tommy Walsh who did field it. And the ball kind of spilled out, tried to pass it across to Barry John Keane. And unfortunately, it didn't come through for them. I think Kilmacud overall were the better team. Now, I think they'll take a bit of confidence from the fact that they won it without Shane Walsh having the kind of influence he would normally have. I think he only got 1 point from play. Now, I wasn't in Croke Park, so I didn't see this, but possibly a reason for that. Now, I don't want to take away from Cormac Coffey's performance on him, But I did notice last year, Shane Walsh is making a real effort to expand his skill set and what he contributes to the game. Like, obviously, he is your traditional forward. He swings the ball over from any angle. He has 2 feet. He's a goal poacher. He's everything you'd want in a forward. But it has come up before, and he's been told, I think Paul Joyce has kind of said this to him, that you need to up your work rate off the ball. And we need to see more of you contributing to that element of our performance. Now, again, I didn't see the game, so I don't know if he was doing that against Kerins O'Rahillys, but that's one element of the game that he's trying to develop. And shadow runs, contributing, creating space. I mean, Shane Walsh is a very smart footballer, and a quiet game for him on paper. If you were to look at his stats elsewhere, he might have had more of an influence than maybe it might seem on the surface.
Yeah, and I mean, like, that's one of the things that I always kind of rated about Kilmacud Crokes, was that while, they do have the Shane Walshes, and while they do have the Paul Mannions, in other games when he is fit, they are a unit. Like, they're a fantastic example of what having a strong 1 to 15 does. I mean, like, their back 6 there, like, over the last couple of years, they had Liam Flatman that played for the league with Dublin. They had Keane O'Sullivan. Both of them aren't playing this year, and yet their defence is stronger than ever, which shows that their defensive structure, their understanding with each other is really, really strong. Because to lose, let's be honest, a generational defender in Keane O'Sullivan, a guy who's probably one of the smartest Gaelic football players I've ever seen, to lose him and to just seamlessly move with Theo Clancy and Michael Mullen coming into that full back line, and for nothing to change, it just shows that, like, their system, their understanding, and just their defence in general is exceptional. And I was saying, like, Desi Farrell wouldn't go too wrong now if he was looking at bringing in the likes of Andrew McGowan, bringing back in the likes of Rory O'Carroll, because they have been phenomenal throughout the entire club championship. An interesting omen here, potentially, for Kilmacud Crokes. Definitely a good omen. The last time Derry Dublin side was, against each other in the All-Ireland Club final, the Derry side was Balahi and the Dublin side was Kilmacud Crokes. That was in 1995, and Kilmacud Crokes got the victory on that day. And speaking of Kilmacud, we'll start, with their game, going a bit deeper into their game. Of course, they won 114 to 14 points against Kerins O'Rahillys. The crucial score, Hugh Kenny's goal in the 34th minute. That, to tag on to what you were saying about Shane Walsh, and to tag on to the point they made about the defence, this shows that even when Shane Walsh kicks just a point, Hugh Kenny steps up and hits 1-2. Shane Cunningham was very impressive. Darren Mullen was very impressive. That's the strength. They have more than one main threat, I think, Crokes.
Yeah. And this, I know Crokes has come up a lot in recent months, and the numbers and the playing membership that they have. And people have talked about, like, the strength that they have they're a Dublin giant club. And I suppose one side of that is, you can say, well, the smaller clubs have a more concentrated membership, so it's easier almost to get the best out of them. Whereas if you have like 1,000 members across all your grades, like, you're not accounting for the guys who they're thrown into a club at 5 or 6 from their parents who love the GAA, and then they get to maybe 11 or 12 and they're old enough to say, actually, I don't really like GAA. And they, like, you do lose players along the way. It's not 1,000 players at senior level. Keeping those lads up to the senior grade, that's where good coaching and people in the right places, that's what makes a good club. So that's a big plus from Kilmacud, that they have such good organisation within the infrastructure, the overall infrastructure of the club, and that filters down into the players, like you said there, and how they've recovered from losing a guy like Keane O'Sullivan and still maintaining that standard. Losing a player like Paul Mannion, Shane Walsh is there to sift in. Now, I think there is a possibility that Paul Mannion could be back in time for the All-Ireland final, and, like, what a trump card you could pull from your pack if that was to come through. And on the goal, like we mentioned there about Shane Walsh only scoring 2 points from play, like another couple of centimetres and that's another point, and it was a serious kick. And for Hugh Kenny to be right underneath it and to be reacting well to it, and he was under a bit of pressure because the way the ball fell, it looked like Kerins O'Rahillys were going to keep him out, and he managed to angle the ball through and get the goal. And again, because the game was a little bit cagey, that was a crucial score. And you can understand, for teams like Kerins O'Rahillys, for teams like Glen, Moycullen, like Croke Park is such a different venue. I mean, it's different to any other game they'll have played in their championship up to now. I think it's players have said before, it's kind of a wider pitch. You also have the noise. You have just the grandeur of the stadium. If you haven't played there before, an occasion can really get to you. So you can imagine teams were probably a little bit tentative getting into the game. Maybe not so much Kilmacud Crokes because they have so much experience.
Entire games there.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like they have county players that have played there. Like they know that stadium, but it can catch you. You know, there's only so much mental preparation you can do for a game, and there's only so many times you can say, "Oh, this is just another game." Croke Park is not just another stadium; it's the stadium, it's the venue, and if you get there, it can spook you. But you know, the way the Kilmacud Crokes have maintained their standards, and club football or club GAA in general is quite cyclical. Like we've seen teams down through the years that win like 3-4 All-Irelands in a row, and then a couple of years later they're down to junior. And again, that can be kind of maybe more parish-based clubs, or the kind of the rural ones. And when they get into that vein of form, they know that this crop that we have to make the most of them, because we don't know what's coming up. And there's other outside factors as well: immigration, migration, losing players to having to move up to the city, and all those kind of problems that the Dublin clubs probably don't have to worry about as much. And then you lose players and you're not able to replace, and the production line gets a little bit interrupted. So that's obviously a plus if you're living in Dublin and you're in the city. And then sometimes they take players who move up from the country, like in Shane Walsh's case. And I know he's the high profile case, and I know there was a lot of pushback to his move, but you can see his point. Like, he lives in Dublin. The commute to Galway, I've driven that road myself. It's you're talking at least 2 hours in the car. And when you're a footballer, you're an athlete, and injury prevention is so important, you're sitting in a car for 2 hours up and down on the motorway. That puts strain on your muscles. And a lot of players have had to change like job or careers, or they've had to move, to try and, make the most out of their football career or their sporting career. And Shane's just another example of that. I suppose it's just that if it wasn't Kilmacud Crokes, if it was Olaf's, or if it was, a lower ranked team, I don't think there would have been as much attention. It's, it does seem a bit like, big team comes down the country and plucks a player from one local. And I don't think that's the case. I mean, Shane Walsh seems to be a big club man. He seems to be a real volunteer, within the GAA. Like, he does a lot of coaching, and seems to be, he's more than just a player that turns up and lines out for a team. He does seem to be a really genuine lad. So it does, from what I've seen anyway, it seems like this was just something he had to do. And it just happens to be Kilmacud Crokes that is benefiting from having him around.
Well, that's what I mean. It's the best club in Dublin, getting the best, probably second to David Clifford as the best footballer in the country right now. I mean, like, he put in a performance for the ages in the All-Ireland final, and then next thing we hear about him, he's moving to probably the biggest club in the country in terms of resources, in terms of players. Like, I mean, to play with Paul Mannion in the forward line, like, it sounded ridiculous when you were hearing about it. But this has been a problem in Dublin ever since I can remember. This is not a fresh thing. Shane Walsh is not the first player to move to a big club in Dublin. St. Vincent's very successful in the 2010s, but if you look at their team, they had Brendan Egan, the Sligo centre half-back. He was playing on their half-back line. They had Nathan Mullins there, and they had Enda Varley, who was Mayo, very, very good Mayo forward, playing in their forward line with Mossy Quinn. They had Lorcan Smith from Westmeath. They had Joe Feeney from Armagh. They had a lot of these guys from different counties. If you go back to the start of the 2010s, Kilmacud Crokes won a Dublin title with Brian Kavanagh playing at full forward. Like, again, even Oliver Plunkett's, they had Anthony Moyles, they had Paul Galvin at one stage, Kieran McKeever, Armagh's centre half-back. This is not a new thing. Parnell's, how many players did they get? Colin Begley, Conor Mortimer, off the top of my head. So Shane Walsh got this attention because he is so brilliant. He's like literally one of the best Gaelic footballers in the country right now, no doubt about it. And he put in one of the best All-Ireland final performances I've ever seen. Never mind from a player who was on the losing team. So that's why it was such a big deal. And there is no doubt that he made the difference in that final against Na Fianna. When Na Fianna looked like they might have Crokes on the ropes, Shane Walsh kicked crucial points at crucial stages and got them through. So I can understand why people might be a little bothered about it, especially if you are a Na Fianna member. But there was one stage where Crokes did look rattled. And this was, in the second half. I predicted before this game that I thought it was going to be a classic Kilmacud Crokes victory. I thought they were going to win it in exactly the same way that they beat Naas, exactly the same way that they beat Portarlington, and the way that they beat the Downs. I thought that they were going to smash them early, hit 1-5 or something, get 5 or 6 points ahead, and cruise the rest of the game out. That's how they've done it. Their defense doesn't let you score. They get 5 or 6 points ahead, and then that's it. For example, Portarlington held scoreless from play in the first half. The Downs held scoreless from play in the first half. Like, remarkable defensive record there the Crokes have. And coming into the last quarter, they were 111-7 ahead. The game had gone pretty much exactly how I thought it would go. And then Crokes just started making kind of mistakes. Conor Ferris was going long with his kickouts. David Moran was fielding a lot of them. And the crowd were really getting in on the action now. And Kerins kind of looked like they might have Crokes a little bit rattled.
Yeah. And that's the scare that they might have needed going into the final, because that's how they fumbled it last year against Kilcoo. And these, I suppose, look, these things can happen. As I said, when Tommy Walsh was on the call last week, he really did speak like, we're not going up there to walk behind the band. We are going up there to give this team a good rattle. And that's what they ended up doing in the end. And you mentioned there about David Moran's fielding, and I think it was his catch that set up that last attack for the attempt at trying to get a goal for a late equaliser. And that can happen in games. You think the game is closed out and you're so close to the line, and then a bit of momentum goes the other way, and you're just trying to grit your teeth and hold on to the end. And of course, look, they had gotten the goal that ended up being the crucial score. In a game like that, a goal was always probably going to be the prevailing factor. But I think, they probably got what they needed to go in. If they had cruised through to the end, maybe then they might be not as sharp going into the final against Glen, and they will need to be against Glen because they are on such a high at the moment. They have all the momentum behind them. And it's, going into a final when you're either the underdog or the favourites tag, they're both difficult positions to be in. If you're the underdog, you have a big fight on your hands. Like, yes, you've nothing to lose and nobody expects anything of you. So the pressure is off in some ways. But if you go up there and you prove everybody right, then that feels like you may as well have not turned up. But it's not easy to go in as the favourites either, because all of the pressure is immediately on you and everybody expects nothing less than a win. Like what you were saying there, you thought that they were going to ramp home. And when I think I put up my piece with Tommy Walsh on our website, and I think we had like one comment and it was like something like not a hope, so there was no, apart from people from their own club going up there and hoping that they would get a result. Maybe not too many other people were expecting it, but it's Kerry as well.
Yeah,
Kerry footballers
with Kerins, they've been beaten 3 times in Kerry though, and they'd scraped past Newcastle West and Era O'Guinness. And if they were in the semi-final against Crokes, I think people would have been saying not a hope for them as well. So I think the how Kerins got there, I think, was kind of unconvincing, even though they did win the Munster Club Championship.
Yeah, but Kerry, that's something that Kerry have done before. Even their county team, Kerry are never really beaten, and they have, like that's just they're very like Kilkenny in that way. They're never beaten until they're on the bus going home. That's what's bred into them from very early on. And when they come up to Croke Park, it feels like a second home to them. And that goes back generations, back to the 70s, people, this isn't our home county, but when we come up here, it's like this is another patch of Kerry ground because they know how to win games there. And that's part of the Kerry mentality, I think. And they did, I mean, you know, they had Kilmacud up against the ropes when no one thought that they would at any point in that game. Again, look, they were probably chasing it a small bit during the game. And Kilmacud were probably always going to win. And they didn't, like, yeah, they got one more chance at it, but they didn't even get a shot on. So Kilmacud did, when the need was greatest, they did hold on.
Yeah, and no, but definitely when that free was floated in by Jack Savage in the 65th minute, definitely the goal that Kilmacud got last year would have flashed in their memory real quick. The other semi-final was Watty Grahams Glen 111, Moycullen 12 points. A first ever All-Ireland club football final appearance for Watty Grahams Glen. Obviously, you mentioned Conor Glass coming back. I don't think I've ever seen a player come back from the AFL and make such an immediate impact as Conor Glass has. I mean, you could argue Ty Kennelly 2009 when he came back, he won an All-Star. Kerry won the All-Ireland. That's definitely right up there. But Conor Glass hasn't just gone back to Australia 1 year later. Like he's stuck around and he's, you know, continuing to build with Derry and continuing to build with Watty Grahams Glen. And he's a key part for both of those sides. Look, Moycullen were very reliant on two players here, and I think that could have been their downfall. Desi Keneally hit 8 points of their tally. Peter Cook hit 2. They were very reliant on those two to get the goods for them. The crucial score, as you mentioned, Tiernan Flanagan's goal. They were 5 up with 20 minutes to go. Very similar to the Crokes game in that Moycullen then staged the fight back. But the Glen, crucial points at crucial times. I have it here. Conor Glass, Cathal Mulholland, and a fisted point from Michael Warnock. There were 3 clutch points at crucial times when Moycullen kind of were coming back into it, and it just got them over the line in the end.
Yeah, I mean, Conor Glass, you run out of words to describe the kind of impact that he's had since he's come back. I interviewed him actually a few years ago when he was out in Australia. And, you know, he mentioned, like, you know, while I'm here, it's on my mind. I want to go back and play for Derry, go back and play for my club at some point. And as he cashed in on that plan and really delivered for club and county, like, this is a dream season for him. And Glen were, you know, I mean, I've said it before, they were full value for their victory. And like, they've Malik O'Rourke as their manager. He's bringing every inch of his strength as a manager to Glen. He did very well with Monaghan, and now he's bringing it to them. They were exceptional. And yeah, Moycullen, you just felt they were lacking. They just needed something. They did. Now, I mean, again, you know, they emptied the tank and it was nearly enough in the end. They also had a chance for a last minute goal, and I think it was just an awkward angle. You know, look, ball can bounce anyway, and we've seen freak scores happen in sport many times in the past, but it just didn't come through for them. Glen just managed to hold on, and they've been fantastic. I mean, I think, as I said before, that win over Kilmacud, that would give anybody huge confidence if you take down a team like that. And at that point in the season, when you still have more time to build momentum throughout the season, that's, you know, they've really shone through there, and they'll be a big challenge for Kilmacud Crokes in the final.
No doubt. And I think what's very interesting when you're looking ahead to that final, obviously we'll do a little preview before. What's interesting when you're looking at it is we're talking about Kilmacud Crokes having their burst. Watty Grahams Glen had a burst right at the start. First 10 minutes, they go 4 points to 0 up. Like, that was Kilmacud Crokes-esque. They hit them real quick, and that really set them up for the rest of the game. You were saying there that they always kind of held up. They always were just that little bit ahead of Moycullen. I think Moycullen will regret that they didn't push up on them sooner, because once they kind of went man to man, once they kind of got a bit braver, they started getting more chances. And you always think that when you look, why weren't they doing this sooner? Why weren't they doing this when it was clear that in the first 10 minutes, Watty Grahams Glen have gone 4 points to 0 up? Clearly what you're doing isn't working. Like, do you think that they might have thought that they left this one behind them in a way?
Look, I'm sure they will have regrets going back. You always do when you lose. You either win or learn. That's the phrase. And yeah, look, they will feel like they made mistakes. I'm sure when they review the tape, they'll realise that themselves. And I suppose Moycullen are really unfortunate because, you know, they made their breakthrough in 2020 when they won the county, but they could go no further because of COVID, and that had obviously put a stop to the provincial and All-Ireland championships going ahead that year. And I'm sure they would have loved a chance, because club is so unique in that it gets win or bust. And if you win, you get momentum, and you don't know where it could take you. You don't know who you could be coming up against in the provincial championships. It's a very unique competition, and the more you win, the more confidence you get. And I think Sean Kelly, when he was speaking to on that press call that Tommy Walsh was on last week, he did mention that, we would have loved a chance to have a cut at it that year. So they got their chance this year, and made the most of it. They got some great wins in Connacht to get them to this point. And I'd say of the two semi-finals, that was probably the most evenly matched one. I'd say predictions probably weren't unanimous across the board. So they will come back. They will go home feeling a bit like what could have been. But sure, that's always the case whenever you don't get the result that you went up for. But as I said, they did when they did push, Glen had a response. So you could do that for 70 minutes and tire yourself out. You do have to know when to sit back, when to attack. And again, Croke Park, it's a different stadium, it's a different ground, and maybe some of those boys weren't maybe used to playing in a pitch like that. Those are all factors that I'm sure Moycullen will be thinking about when they think back over that game.
Yeah, it's just the type of thing that, like, Moycullen, I remember they battered Westport at 318 to 111 or something. I remember thinking, like, God, this is frightening tally to put up at this time of the year. And since then, their attack has not looked anything like it did in that game. I mean, against Strokestown, they went long periods without scoring from play. Same against Turlestrand. Like, they looked kind of dodgy in those two games. And I was thinking, where's that spark that they had against Westport? Where's that freedom? Where's that movement? Where's that, creativity that they had against Westport? You would have looked in those games, particularly in this game when Desi Keneally was putting up all of the scores for them. You're looking towards the Kellys. You're looking towards Owen Gallagher. Still, he needs a dig out here. He needs someone to come and help him. Fittingly enough, that last moment fell to him and Peter Cook to try and make something happen, try and make some magic happen, which obviously it didn't. And Watty Grahams Glen are into the final for the first time ever, which is one hell of an achievement, which does bring me to the next part where we're going to try and give a little prediction for this. Watty Grahams Glen and Kilmacud Crokes in the final. First Dublin Derry final since 95, as I said. Now, one thing that I'd like to start off the preview with is that I think these sides are two very, very similar sides in terms of how that they are structured, how they are set out. They're very, very strong at the back. They have a very, very strong structure there. They have a brilliant midfield pairing that dominate pretty much every game that they play. And then up front, they kind of rely on two or three lads to kick crucial points at crucial times. They like to hit teams early and then control the game for the rest of the game. They're two teams that are quite similar. And I think it will be interesting to see how they match up. Obviously, styles make fights, as they say. And this will be very interesting because I think they're a lot more similar than people think.
Yeah, it definitely tees up a very interesting final. I think, if Shane Walsh gets humming, that's going to be a big, Glen are going to have to, they haven't had to plan for a forward like him before. This is going to be a different challenge for them. And if they get Paul Mannion back in time for the final as well, I think that's obviously looking at it very basic and it's probably simplifying it a bit too much. But if they get those two lads in for the final, I think that might be a bit much for Glen. Kilmacud have the more experience. They've been here before. They've quality all over the pitch, and they've intercounty experience there as well. I know Glen have Conor Glass. We've talked about him so much already. He's made such a big impact. And look, finals are there to be won. Kilmacud have lost before. Maybe they'll get spooked. And while I think the way it ended against Kerins O'Rahillys might sharpen them up, it could work the other way. Now that they're back there, And like I said before, you know, when you maybe have a favourites tag on your back and the pressure that comes with that, you can buckle under that too. I think though, if I am going to hone in on something, I do think it's going to be on Kilmacud's attack. If they can get working there, I think that might be a bit much for Glen in the final.
Yeah, I kind of know how I think the game is going to go. How I believe anyway, if I was to predict it, I think they are both. I think Malachy O'Rourke is going to look at Kilmacud Crokes' games and he's going to say, right, the first thing we need to do is we need to get through the first 15, 20 minutes without conceding a goal. We need to get through that first quarter without conceding a goal or without letting Kilmacud get the run on us, get 3 or 4 points ahead. Because as we've discussed, once Crokes get that distance between you, you don't catch them. I can't, off the top of my head, think of, unless you're talking about the Kilmacud final last year, I can't think of when Kilmacud had a decent lead and let it slip. Throughout this, from day one of the Dublin Football Championship, once Crokes get ahead of you, you don't catch them. And this Crokes defence know exactly how to shut down a forward line. They shut down a forward line with the Downs where they had Luke Loughlin. They shut down a forward line with Port Darlington that has Jake Foster, Colin Murphy. They are supremely good in defence. And they also the last time Conor Ferris has conceded a goal was the Dublin semi-final against Thomas Davis. In the first 5 minutes of the game, Sean Murray stuck the ball in the back of the net. And since then, off the top of my head, I don't think they've conceded a goal in the championship up until now, which shows just how good they are at the back. I think what is going to happen is the Glen will be so determined to not let Crokes get ahead of them from the start. So the game is going to be very tentative at the start. It's going to be very low scoring. And then the fact that I think Crokes have a slightly better defence, but I think Watty Grahams Glen have a better midfield in Conor Glass and Emmett Bradley. So I think those two will be very interesting to see how they move. My point is that I think the structures will cancel each other out and it will be a low scoring game. And then going into the last 20 minutes, I think Crokes will spring Paul Mannion off the bench and then they will have two absolute world beaters there in the forward line that when the crucial scores need to be kicked, I think Kilmacud Crokes have more players who can take the shot than Watty Grahams Glen do. And I think if you look at the fact that Crokes will have a plan for Conor Glass that might limit his influence, and Watty Grahams Glen will definitely have a plan for Shane Walsh that might limit his influence. But the point is, when Shane Walsh wasn't really at the races, Kilmacud Crokes still won. And Hugh Kenny stood up at 1-2. And if Paul Mannion's there as well, if Darren Mullen's on his game, I see more players that are threats for Kilmacud Crokes that could score crucial points at crucial times, and I think they will win by a point. That's what I'm saying.
I think that's all pretty fair. On the midfield thing, I mean, I think Craig Diaz is a pretty decent forward. I think he's a pretty decent club forward. Yeah. Now I know it hasn't maybe taken off for him with Dublin. And I think he might have said last year he's kind of at peace with, that's probably not going to be there for him now. I think I covered a game in Croke Park a couple of years ago. I think Dublin were playing Donegal. I think Craig was playing that evening. And yeah, he probably did struggle a little bit at inter-county level. But he's a big player for Kilmacud. And even if he hasn't maybe quite made it at that level, being somewhere kind of just a little bit beneath it can still be a big contributing factor when you go back to play for your club. So, I wouldn't totally write off Kilmacud's midfield either, although I think, Conor Glass is probably going to boss it there as he has.
Just because I think Watty Grahams Glen have the best midfield pairing in the country in terms of club. They've got, not only do they have Conor Glass, they've Emmett Bradley beside him. They've Derry's midfield pairing. And that's going to be a big part of their game that they'll probably try to maximise. But yeah, I think I would keep going back to, I know they'll have a plan for Shane Walsh. You couldn't not go up and play against Kilmacud Crokes without a plan for Shane Walsh. But even if you do have a plan for Shane Walsh, he has a plan for you too. And he is hard stopped and he is hard controlled. And even if he's not popping up with big scores every game, there's other players there, as you mentioned. They have replacements
Kilmacud have serious depth. And this is maybe where, a City team with all they have at their disposal, when well harnessed, it's not quantity doesn't always equal quality, and you do need people in the right positions to make the best use of what you have. But Kilmacud are doing that and have been doing that for a good while, and they have the experience at this stage. I think that's a big crucial factor, and I think they're ready to take the step and make correct what they got wrong against Kilcoo last year. I just think while this has been a brilliant season for Glen, and they could do, what Malachy O'Rourke has up his sleeve, we don't know. Again, as I said, a final is there to be won, and if they can do what you're saying there, if they can nullify Kilmacud in the first few minutes and stop their influence at the start, not let them run into a lead, not be chasing the game, then it's there. Then it's up for anybody. But I think Kilmacud are going to do that. I think they are going to start hard, and I think they will have just a bit too much for them.
Yeah, the fact that they were so close last year as well, like they had it at halftime. I remember Craig Diaz getting a score right before halftime, and I remember being like, Crokes are walking this game. Like, they are walking this game. And I couldn't see how they would let it slip, but then they did. And just the way that they lost it as well, that last minute goal, like just pure heartbreak. And then you've seen all the interviews coming out that like they have their lock screen as the Kilcoo boys lifting the trophy and stuff like that has been on their mind, in their conscience since the day that it happened, and they haven't let it go. And this is why I think just the pain of losing, they do not want to lose again. And as you were talking about cashing in on this crop, there will be a growing need now for Crokes to get an All-Ireland medal. We want to win this, because 2018, obviously they won in Dublin, and they got knocked out by Mullinachta. 2021 looked like it should have been their year. That definitely should have been the one that they should have won. I think, Kilcoo obviously deserved one, for the run that they had put together, not just that year, but the year previous. But, Crokes let that one slip, let's be real. And this year, they're going to be very, very determined to not do that. So I think if they get ahead, I think they won't let it slip this time.
And there's only so many chances that you get. If you can get yourself into these positions, but if you keep falling short, that can work against you as well. So I think the pressure is definitely on for them to go and finish the job now. Because I remember in 2018 when they lost to Mullinachta, because obviously that was such a big result for a club from Longford. But Mullinachta were the better team that day. Whether or not Kilmacud didn't go with their head screwed on, I don't know. But Mullinachta beat them. It wasn't a case that it was like a last minute go, like long ball in and the ball just lands in the net. They beat them. And that, I'd say, is probably still on their mind, even, this far on as well. And what you mentioned there about losing the All-Ireland final last year, like that has to be motivating them all the way through this year. You bottle that hurt and you carry it through to try and finish the job. But it's coming to the time now where if you keep losing, teams are going to keep beating you. And Glen will be aware of that as well, that they've been in positions like this before where, there's been clutch moments that they haven't followed through on, and they haven't been able to survive. So it can work one of two ways, and it'll just depend on who turns up on the day.
Yeah, no, it'll be very interesting to see. But that is my prediction. I think Crokes are going to do it. I think that they will make up for last year's final defeat. And as much as Watty Grahams Glen deserve an All-Ireland medal, for the work that Malachy O'Rourke has done, for the work that his team have done, I just think Crokes have more players that will take crucial shots at crucial times when the game comes to those crunch moments. And I think that is what is going to get them over the line by no more than 2 points. I'm going for a 1 point victory for Crokes. Wouldn't be surprised if that victory comes in extra time either. But I just feel like they've more threats than Watty Grahams Glen do. Obviously, there were some other news as well this weekend. One of the greatest GAA players of his generation, one of the greatest GAA players I've seen, Lee Keegan, and in my opinion, the greatest player to never win an All-Ireland medal. He retired there last week, in the last couple of days. Just an exceptional Gaelic footballer. Seriously, if you're talking for what a right half back should be, for me, the best right half backs I've seen is Lee Keegan and James McCarthy. Like Tomas O'Shea, definitely up there as well. But in terms of like when he was at his best, I mean, I've never seen a player more talented, more naturally gifted than Diarmuid Connolly. And when he was on it, that battle that he had with Lee Keegan, and the fact that Lee Keegan, you know, did a pretty good job on him when he was at the absolute peak of his powers. And not only that, stuck away 2 goals in back-to-back All-Ireland finals. And both times that he scored those goals, I have to say as a dub, I fully thought Mayo are going to win this. I cannot see how they lose the game from here. And then they did. But Lee Keegan was always one that you have to say he showed up every time Mayo needed him to. He absolutely led the way every time that they need him to. You even think back to 2021, that final against Tyrone, when Tyrone had just got their second goal and immediately Lee Keegan puts over a stunning point to kind of steady the ship. He was just a pure leader and he always turned up when Mayo needed him to. In my opinion, not only is he the best player to win an All-Ireland medal, not to never win an All-Ireland medal, sorry, I think he's Mayo's best player of the modern era. Like I really do. And yeah, it's going to be a huge loss for Max Day that he's gone. But all the best in retirement, Lee. But what a blow for Max Day.
Yeah, huge loss to Mayo. I absolutely agree with everything you've said there. Probably the best player I've seen not to win an All-Ireland. Made such an impact from the minute he made the breakthrough with Mayo. Just such a consistent player, whether he was playing in the full-back line, half-back line, he just had it all. He was a brilliant defender. Like what you were saying there, like in my opinion, on his day, I think Diarmuid Connolly was the best footballer in the country. He just was always so composed. I rarely ever saw him get blocked. I rarely ever saw him look anxious with the ball. He always knew what to do with it. Always knew how to pick his scores. Just a absolutely fabulous forward. And Lee Keegan, I think nearly every time he marked him, did a job on him. Mm-hmm. You know, really just stuck to him and completely nullified his influence. And I don't think I've seen any other player, you know, do such a job on Diarmuid Connolly. Just an all-rounder. And those goals he scored for Mayo in All-Ireland finals, and they were always the same. It was like, you know, he would just come steaming through, ball like bottom corner, whether it was into the hill or down into the Davin. And I think somebody shared one of the goals he scored last night in an All-Ireland final, long ball in. I think Aidan O'Shea caught it, turned, started spread, and like Lee Keegan just absolutely comes thumping down, gets the ball off him and just slams it in. And like, this is against Stephen Cluxton, probably the best goalkeeper I've ever seen in Gaelic football, and he always scored against him. This is a back. You know, he probably could have played a bit more in the forwards if Mayo could afford to let him out of defence, but they actually could. Like, he was just too good a defender, too good a man marker to put him anywhere else. And I can't remember which final it was, whether it was 16 or 17 when they lost. It might have been the Dean Rock one where he threw the GPS. It was at 17, yeah. And he was like on the floor crying, the jersey nearly off his head, absolutely spent, not a vitamin of energy left. And you were kind of like, what do they have to do? Like, I don't know what it is about Mayo, how they kept hurting themselves in All-Ireland finals, whether it was own goals or, you know, I think it was Donald Vaughan who got sent off. That was a crazy moment. And I remember, you know, I know we're going off topic here, but I remember like when he came in and he knocked John Small and Aidan. I remember Aidan O'Shea's face just dropped. He knew he was gone. And then you knew Mayo were gone then, because you couldn't, I mean, if you're going to beat Dublin, you're not going to, I mean, you need 15 on the pitch. You can't beat them with 14 players. Even Mayo, who were the only team who could compete with Dublin at their absolute height in championship, nobody could compete with Dublin. If it wasn't for Mayo, we wouldn't have had a championship. We wouldn't have had All-Ireland finals. They were the saviour of the season in that they made the games competitive. And I know that is precious little to Lee. I mean, he would have traded all that in for one All-Ireland medal. But it was something. You know, we had something to look forward to. You knew Mayo were always going to bring it against Dublin. I think there was maybe 1 year where Dublin beat them quite heavily.
2019.
2019, yeah. But other than that, they were always able to compete. And even, you know what I mean? Like, it was Mayo who beat Dublin, you know, who stopped this juggernaut. And like, Lee would have been part of that team as well. And like, even into he could have easily gone back. If he would be an straight number one starter, no problem with Kevin McStay. He was not showing, to me anyway, and I haven't covered too many of the men's intercounty games, but to me, he was still, you know, hitting standards, still hitting whatever numbers you need to hit to be starting in the team, whatever you need to be doing a training, play and performing in matches. He was always doing it. And he was playing cornerback, you know, into his 30s. Like that, you know, because cornerback is a speed merchant's game. You need speed to be able to marshal these really good forwards. And he was always able to do it. He always stood up. Any game, even when Mayo were poor, Lee Keegan was good. He always delivered. And it's such a pity that he'll have to go without an All-Ireland medal. I'd say he probably thought it'll happen because they were always thereabouts. They were always in the background or getting to finals. I think if they were to, I'd say 2012 will be a one that will really kind of stick in the craw that they didn't win. Because it was the two goals that it was those goals that really killed them. I think they could have beaten that Donegal team. The Dublin games, I think, you know, people didn't expect them to win anyway. And while they came close, I think it was always going to be Dublin that was going to win. But to have had so many chances and to not win a medal, like, it will haunt him, obviously. But I suppose he knew he had to step away at some point. Possibly the losing Oisín Mullen, was that a factor in him retiring? Possibly, you know, because he's obviously a huge player to lose, and Mayo can't really afford to lose players. They need everybody at the pump if they're going to win, especially when they haven't won already. If it was a team that had won something, I don't know what it does, you know, success breeds success or something, you know, you get other players to come in, but when you're always the team that's chasing, you need everybody. And I look at, you know, he's married now, maybe he's just going into a different period of his life, and it's just time to walk away. And also, I think if you're going to leave, you want to leave on your own terms. You don't want to be the player that's being kind of pushed out.
Hanging on and everything.
Yeah. And it has happened, and it's happened to players who I thought were indispensable, irreplaceable, but everybody is. Time waits for nobody, and the production line is bringing in players all the time, and you can take that chance if you want and like to believe that you're different, but no one is. And maybe Lee thought that himself. Look, you know, if I can't win in All-Ireland, at least I will finish this my way. And that's what he's done. And I think he was kind of indicating that, you know, even in the last couple of months, you know, he was saying, oh, we'll see how the Mayo Championship goes. And to, like, you know, I know he's going to continue playing with Westport, but like that they won the county championship, maybe that's, you know, feeding into his thinking in some way as well.
The fitting end in some way.
So, yeah, not that it's not ending with the club. He's going to continue with them, but yeah, maybe that's part of it too. You know, maybe if I put more time into the club, we could press on from what we did this year. But he's a huge loss, and it's going to be very interesting to see how Kevin McStay adapts in his first, you know, in coming in as the new Mayo manager without two massive players, and how they're going to cope without them.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the worst start that McStay could have had. I mean, to this, I mean, how do you get worse than that, losing probably one of the best footballers in the country in Oisín Mullen, and then another one in Lee Keegan? I mean, and not only, but two leaders as well, two absolute threats from defence, just the worst possible start. And to say, yeah, I kind of did see his retirement coming, just in the sense that all of a sudden he was on RT's, you know, coverage. He started popping up on podcasts, and to me, that's always the first sign that someone is about to walk, that someone is about to retire. Once they start testing, you know, what would they do when they do retire, once they start popping up on shows, I'm like, okay, I can I can see this player going. I mean, Conor McManus is another one. I'm saying now, Conor McManus has started popping up in the RT studio to cover games. I would not be surprised at all if Conor McManus is retired next year. I think he's approaching mid-30s. If he's not already there, I wouldn't know off the top of my head. But I wouldn't be surprised if he walks straight into the RTE, studio to be a pundit there, because obviously, Pat Spillane isn't there anymore. Colin O'Rourke is the new Mead boss. A lot of people, Micheál Donoghue is gone too. A lot of people who were RT pundits last year are gone. So I think Lee Keegan will walk in there as one of them next year as well. I wouldn't be surprised at all, because he started doing that. And the fact that Mayo were out, and the fact that there was all these rumours about Oisín Mullen, I was saying, like, they're further away than they ever were from winning on All-Ireland when Lee Keegan was playing. Kerry showed them the ceiling in that quarter-final, and Kerry showed them the ceiling in the league final too. They were miles off the pace in both of those games, and they're not going to catch Kerry next year, I don't think, especially without Oisín Mullen. And I think maybe that might have been the reason that he left. And to look back on what you said about the Donal Vaughan incident, one thing that I always found with Mayo was, like, obviously I watch these games as a Dublin fan, wanting Dublin to win on the day. But one thing that I always noticed about Mayo is there's always a moment where something happens and you're like, that's it. That's the moment that defines this year's shortfall. Like 2021, it was Ryan O'Donoghue missing the penalty. 2020, it was Conor O'Callaghan fisting in the second goal. 2017, it's Donal Vaughan's red card. 2016, it's the own goals. 2012, it's Michael Murphy's goal after 2 minutes. Like, every year there's a moment where something happens that you can't really get your head around how that just happened. Like Michael Murphy being left in the penalty box with one man marking him. You think, how has this happened? How have they allowed this to happen? And 2013, Bernard Brogan ends up one-on-one in the penalty box again for a goal, exactly 1 year after. So Mayo made mistakes in these finals, and Lee Keegan was never involved in any of them. Like, he always did his absolute utmost, and other people made mistakes at key moments that just meant Mayo didn't get over the line. I mean, you're looking, I think, most heartbreaking one was, I can't exactly remember the year off the top of my head, but I think it was Cillian O'Connor took a free and he hit the post, and then it went straight down the other end and Dublin got a free that they nailed. And I was like, that's the difference in these games, that inch. And I think if there was one game that Lee Keegan will actually regret, I know we talked about the 2012 final, but obviously at that time, to win an All-Ireland, you had to beat Dublin. And I think actually, while 2017 is definitely one that you look at, and 2016 is definitely one that you look at, and I'd say that they should have won both of those games. 2015, do you remember when all of a sudden it was the All-Ireland semi-final, the first game, not the replay?
Yes.
Where Andy Moran equalised and there was still 5 minutes left. And
yes,
when Andy Moran
equalised, the Kerry one. Yeah.
It was where Stephen Cluxton was having a meltdown. He kicked 2 kickouts straight to Mayo, and they'd got a goal and a point off them. And there was this sense that, like, Dublin are completely falling apart. And bear in mind, at this time, Dublin were not All-Ireland champions. Kerry were All-Ireland champions. And Kerry were waiting for Mayo in the final if Mayo had beaten Dublin that day. And somehow they just didn't finish Dublin off. It was like one of the things where they just didn't land the knockout punch. Dublin were wobbled. They were against the ropes. And Mayo just didn't land that final shot. And they should have. And they certainly should have in that game. And 2016, they should have as well. 2017, they should have as well. But, I mean, it's a real testament to how good that Dublin team was, that they never tapped out. They always found a way to come back and survive and then get the win. They were serious winners, that Dublin team. Yeah. But I think out of all the ones, I think that's the one that might stick in his mind the most.
Yeah. And like 2015, like that's kind of the start of Dublin's emergence as well. And I don't think maybe people didn't, people probably knew they were going to go on a run, but they didn't expect maybe, a 6 in a row run. I don't know if people, like at that point, no one could have known what Dublin were going to do at that point. Mayo just have such a low light reel. Like, they're just this inexplicable county who are as likely, like, there was a time there where they were as likely to lose to, like, Carlow in the qualifiers as they were to possibly beat Dublin in the All-Ireland final. Like, they just had such a spectrum of possibilities.
They played to the level of whoever they were playing against.
Exactly. They just, I don't know what it was. And there's no team like them. I think somebody has said before, ESPN's 30 for 30, they should do something on Mayo, because they are such a case study. They should be put in a lab and have tests done on them. I don't understand how.
But 2017 was that. They got knocked out of Connacht. I believe it was by Galway. And then they went into the qualifiers. Derry were not the Derry that they are now. They got taken to extra time by a very poor Derry side that were in Division 3 at the time. Yeah. They scraped past Clare. They scraped past a very bang average Cork team. And then they get past Roscommon. I think it was after a replay they got past Roscommon. And then all of a sudden, they beat Kerry. And then they take probably the best Dublin side I've ever seen. And they should have beaten them. It made no sense how this Mayo team that realistically should have been beaten by Derry down in the qualifiers was then, should have beaten Dublin in the All-Ireland final. It was just, again, such a weird one. But either way, I think we can safely say Lee Keegan's one of the best that we've ever seen to do it. And it'd be interesting to see now what he does in retirement. Will he win more with Westport? Hopefully. I mean, I have to say, I know I'm a Dublin fan, and I know, but as a Gaelic football fan, I wish he won one. I really do. I really wish that Mayo won one. Not only Lee Keegan, but I think Aidan O'Shea definitely deserves one. Cillian O'Connor definitely deserves one. Dermot O'Connor, Keith Higgins definitely deserves one. Like, all these guys are great to the game, and Dublin some of the Dublin players have 8. So I think, I think they could have. I wish Mayo got one. If I had to pick, obviously I'd pick that they would have beaten Tyrone in the 2021 final. I wouldn't want to take away one of ours, but they deserve one. He definitely does.
Yeah, like I know, and you were mentioned there about Cillian O'Connor, and I'm not going to commit to the years here because I can't remember, but I remember writing a piece about what you mentioned there. He missed a free in the All-Ireland final in the same position 2 years back to back in the same spot, and then Dublin went on to win. And I just remember thinking, like, that just sums up the cruelty that this Mayo team cannot escape from. It just seemed like there was always something tripping them up, whether it was themselves or something like the two own goals like that in the All-Ireland final. That was just a freak. I'd never seen anything like that before, and yet they still stayed in touch. They still stayed in it.
The worst thing about the 2 own goals was Dublin were playing awful. They were so bad in the first 15, 20 minutes. Mayo were all over them, and Mayo scored 2 own goals, and Dublin were only 1 point behind, or were they 1 point ahead or something going in at halftime, even though they played crap. They'd been nowhere near the level that they'd been at, and Mayo had helped them out with 2 own goals.
Yeah, and even in 2021, the semi-final, like, Dublin were home and host. Like, they were doing a Dublin performance. They were building, 5 points up at halftime, getting ready to push on through the gears in the second half. Mayo were all over the place. Aidan O'Shea had missed that free. Do you remember he got a mark?
Yeah.
And he missed a free from right in front of the post.
13-yard line.
And I remember being like, I am done with Mayo. I'm sick of being sorry for them. They don't deserve it at this point. This is what they do, and they get chances like this. And then they just, suddenly there was like 50 minutes gone and they weren't dead. And you're like, why aren't they dead? And then they just so slowly start coming back into it. And then just this burst. And I think Tommy Conroy?
Tommy,
just took total control of the game. And I remember there was one moment, I'm sorry, we're kind of going off from Lee Keegan here, but there was one moment, I think Mayo had a 50, and it went kind of wayward.
Dermot
O'Connor kept the ball in, and it was this like absolute lunge, and the rain and everything, like an absolute downpour. And that just summed up how they when they
and you didn't mention it came back out to Kevin McLaughlin and he put it over the bar.
Yeah, and that just summed up how if they can get their fingernails in, they will stay in somehow. They're the most fascinating team I've ever seen in any sport, and it's just so cruel that Lee Keegan's a big part of that. And there wasn't, like, it would have been if they had just won it once, that would have been something for him to bring into to retirement. But it's such a pity that he doesn't have what he deserves going into retirement. And I think, yeah, he'll stick with Westport. You know, he won an All-Ireland with them at intermediate, and I think he will target more at senior level with them. I think he still has goals to achieve in the sport. He has started going into a bit of punditry. He seems quite comfortable in it. I think he's going to expand on that as well. Whether coaching is there for him down the line, that's a possibility as well. I don't know if he's kind of dipped his toe into it too much already, but we'll still see him around. He's gonna his face will pop up. But it's awful. He's one of the players I remember growing, maybe kind of as I was a bit older watching the game, to see someone that's a kind of an attachment to your growth, like maybe not my youth, but growing up. That's another kind of link that's been torn.
I think he's built for the punditry because he speaks very, very well. And he just seems like a really, really nice guy, to be honest. Like any time that I've watched him do an interview or at the end of the game, don't get me wrong, he was a tough player on the pitch, and definitely some of his battles with Dermot Connolly kind of showed that, there's a serious competitor in there. But when the game was over, he shook hands, no matter what, no matter how heartbreaking the result was, no matter how in bits he was at the end of the game, he shook hands with his opponent. And he showed class, no matter the result. And just an absolute warrior. Seems like a really, really nice guy. So he's going to go into punditry because not only that, the stories he'll be able to tell of, his duels with Dermot Connolly, his duels against Kerry. A lot of people would be very interested to hear him tell the stories that he's had throughout his career. But yeah, that's it. That's a wrap on Lee. Wish him all the best. Moving from a great who has retired to a great that is playing now. This is the last bit we'll talk about in this wrap up. David Clifford. Talk about star power here. How many kids ran on to David Clifford straight away when the full-time whistle was blown? I think Fossa got that victory in this junior semi-final, junior All-Ireland semi-final. They beat Castletown. David Clifford is standing there marking his man, and then the entire stadium converges on him at one time. This is, I think, purely I know players in the past have been popular, but David Clifford, I don't think I've ever seen star power like this from a Gaelic footballer.
Yeah. The fan base, he is a household name, definitely. Even, when he made his breakthrough, he was a household name, I'd say, by the end of the summer, because he was just doing these amazing things. He's a very, he's such a tall guy. And that obviously when you see him, if you see images of him kicking the ball, his foot is nearly up above his head.
Yeah.
He's just got such a range. He's like Haaland, nearly Erling Haaland.
Yeah.
And just the way he can move his muscles.
It's like a prototype for a Gaelic footballer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he's just, it's no surprise kids are flocking to him every chance they get, because he is who he is. He has made such an imprint on the sport, and he's still I know he's here a few years, but it's not like he's, if it was another county, he'd be considered still a newcomer. He's just made such a massive impact since getting into the Kerry senior squad, and he's made that his team from very early on. I wrote a piece about him a few years ago when I was talking to the former Kerry footballer Sean O'Sullivan, and he would have watched Clifford's development from a young age, and he actually told me something really interesting about when you see him walking, he's kind of quite languid. He's almost kind of flubber nearly. There's no bones there. It's all skin. And when he was growing up, they actually had to get him to retrain his running style, because he wasn't getting the most out of himself. And now that's obviously made such a big impact, because, he maybe looks like he's maybe not quite that fast when he gets the ball, but then he gets going and he takes the player on, and he just makes it look so easy when he has the ball.
It's one of those, he's not going fast. Yeah, try catch him.
Sort of, yeah, like a lackadaisical sort of look or something. I don't know how to how to phrase it. Maybe it's just because of his height. People don't look like they're moving as quickly when they're that bit taller. And then the way he solos the ball. Shane Walsh even last year came out and said that he's started to kind of hone in on his solo style based on what he's seen David Clifford doing. Like the way he like kind of converges over the ball when he solos. And that's the best type of solo technique, because if you cover yourself when you're soloing, no one can get the hand in, no one can dispossess you. And he's got, again, another player who's got 2 feet, can score from insane angles, insane distances, his huge range in his shots. Again, knows where the net is and how to score goals. Like, it's no surprise kids are looking up to him and wanting his autograph whenever they can. It's kind of like Joe Canning in Galway. This, he just is a cut above the rest. He's just such a distinguished talent. And again, a nice guy, seems like a nice person anytime. Obviously, like, when a microphone's on, everyone's going to put their best foot forward, but he does give off the air of somebody who is a nice person. You're kind of glad that he's doing well. And Fossa sounds like a kind of small place. And himself and Paddy are, bringing them on such a big journey. And then when he goes on and does what he's doing with Kerry, that's obviously such a local pride thing as well. If you've young kids who are seeing him, like, try and stop them trying to go up and get an autograph from him. And that's, when you're an amateur player, obviously, I'm sure there is it does take a toll on you when you've just played a match and now I have hundreds of autographs and pictures to have to pose for. But it's so important that the players do that and that they oblige them, because we all remember what it was like when we were kids and you're looking up at this big guy and you're kind of half afraid to ask them for an autograph in case they say no, because they might be thick after the game, they're not happy with how it went or they lost or whatever. Yeah. But it's so important that they can put their feelings to one side and give time to this kid or a bunch of kids, whatever the case is, and sign the autographs, pose for the photos, give them your time, because that's their formative years. That's the impressionable memories that they take with them growing up. And they love this sport too. They want to be like you. They want this for themselves at some point down the line. Like, I remember, I think Aidan O'Shea got it in the neck one time because he stood and signed autographs after a game one time. I think Mayo might have been beaten or something. And everybody was giving out that he wasn't going down to the warm down jog instead of signing the autographs. But I'm glad he did, because you brush past a child once, they won't do that again. They won't want to go near players again to get an autograph. And that's an awful thing for them to have to carry then. Like, they don't want to go near the players because they think that, well, they all must be like that. You are like, you're celebrities in a way, especially to young people. Like, they do look up to you. Like, this is, like, Gaelic games are our NFL. Like, that's what kids are watching on telly. That's why they tune into the Sunday game every week, to see their favourite players. And David seems to be carrying that role really, really well. He knows how important it is. He would have been a kid when Colm Cooper and the O'Sheas and all these big Kerry stars were winning Ireland's, and he was probably going to those meet and greets and queuing up for autographs, and they gave him their time. So now he's doing that for this generation. And he's a phenomenal player. Like, again, you'd run out of words to describe him. And I think already we can say he's probably one of the all-time greats. Yeah. That's just the Kerry thing. I don't know, but he, himself and Shane Walsh, like that All-Ireland final. I was actually there. I was in the Davin stand. So I actually had a really interesting angle of the two boys, either half. And I remember, like, that mark that David Clifford got, where he kind of came from one position and he kind of leaped up into another and got the mark. I mean, that to be so close to that and see it live, you have to kind of put him down as an all-time great already, because that's something you don't always see in the sport.
No doubt. I mean, I had this chat there actually yesterday on GAA Fan TV's podcast. If you're watching, have a look at that as well. It's just, we were talking that David Clifford seems like he's he's ready for this. He's ready for the fame, and he's ready for the notoriety that he's going to get from this, because we knew he was coming. Like, I mean, you watch the Kerry Derry minor All-Ireland final in 2017 when David Clifford scores 4 goals. Like, I remember, because I went to watch the Mayo Dublin All-Ireland final. I remember watching that minor final and being like, this fella's a problem. Like, if this fella gets through with the right guys and he's managed correctly, this guy is a serious problem. Because the thing that I always point out when people are talking about Dublin's dominance is, I'm saying that dominance came off the back of one minor All-Ireland title that Dublin won in 2012. Kerry won 5 in a row. They're the only county to do that at minor level, to win 5 minor All-Irelands in a row. And in those players were David Clifford, Sean O'Shea, Paul Walsh, and so on. And I'm saying, if Kerry can put these lads into a cohesive unit, and now they've won their first All-Ireland. Dublin won 6 All-Irelands, as I said, off the back of one minor All-Ireland. Kerry won 5 in a row. What can they do? They've already won their first, and now they have a generational player there in David Clifford in their forwards. Yeah, I completely agree with that. That impact on a kid when, a star, gives them a signature, or gives them an autograph or gets in a photo with them, like, it lasts. And sure, I have a picture, I had Ger Brennan on my podcast when I started this, pretty early on. I had the pleasure of interviewing Ger. I think it was a few months into doing it. And then my parents sent me a photo, and it was me when I was 5 or 6 years old getting an autograph off Ger Brennan. And it was mad to look at that and say, like, there's, a tiny me getting a signature off him. And I remember getting the autographs off the Dublin team that year. And sure, I remember going up, Dublin played Kilkenny in Parnell Park, and I remember running on to try and get a picture with Henry Shefflin. I remember I forgot how to speak English, so I was like, gave him the phone. Like, it's one of the things where, yeah, David Clifford is a god to these kids. Like, they absolutely adore him, look up to him, and they all want to be like him. So him staying and signing those autographs and just being a really nice guy, that's going to have a major, good effect on the GAA in terms of players that will play the game in the future, because he is a star. And we were saying this off air. He's a type of guy where people will watch Kerry play and they won't even really be that interested in the GAA, but they know who David Clifford is. And he's reached that level, which is even more remarkable when you consider that he doesn't have Instagram. He doesn't use social media. He stays away from it. His fame and notoriety is based completely on his game.
Yeah, that's it. And I remember he was asked about that, like, why aren't you on social media? And he just doesn't seem to really be bothered. And that's a personal choice. Like, there's other GAA players who have very active online profiles, and that's their decision. Now it can kind of expose you to the odd moron who starts trying to send messages to you and giving you their 2 cents about how you're playing and how you need to be playing better and how you're not delivering. But he just seems to be like what you said there at the start. He just seems to be very ready for this. It just seems to sit so easily with him. Like, this guy has obviously been visualizing this since he was a child, out in the back garden kicking balls over jumpers for goalposts, and that this is absolutely his life's purpose, is to be what he is. And it seems to be sitting into it so seamlessly. Like, there hasn't been one bump in the road. There hasn't been one time where we've thought, oh, David Clifford's not maybe what we thought he was, or the second year syndrome, not even close. Like, he loves this. He loves it. That's what I think. Like, he just loves this sport. I think, again, when I was writing that piece about him, like, he was a guy who would take a bag of footballs, go down to the pitch, kick the ball over the bar, and he would stay there until it gets dark. And that's it. That's all he wants. It's very simple. This is not just something that he's good at. It's something that he loves to do. And the attention is secondary. Like, yes, it's great to be scoring goals in front of 70, 80,000 people. Yes, it's great to be, signing autographs and having young kids coming up to you and all the all-stars and the accolades, all that stuff. That's great. But he just loves the sport. It's just, that's what he wants to do all day, every day. And from when he was obviously very, very young, he has been dreaming of this. And yeah, I'm here now. This is what I've always thought I was going to be. So like, bring on more of it and more of it and more of it. And yeah, I mean, obviously he himself is a great talent, but you do need talented players around you. And it's such a pity. Like Sean Shea, I think, is an exceptional talent. And if David Clifford wasn't there, I think we'd be talking about Sean Shea in these terms, because that point against Dublin, the composure, like those kind of frees, I think they're becoming more, players are becoming so much better at putting over those kind of frees than maybe, I don't know if I'm right in saying that, but it's such a difficult skill to put a ball over the bar from that distance off the ground. But he has just nailed it. Like, he's so good at getting those kind of scores. And under the pressure, everything, again, he seems to be another guy who just seems to be sitting so easily into this role. Like, sure, why wouldn't I be comfortable? I've always wanted to play for Kerry. People would kill me for this position. I'm the envy of so many people. And I'm here now, so I'm going to just take this opportunity and go for as long as I can with it. And they're bringing more players with. I mean, like, you know, first it was David Clifford, now it's Watty Clifford, and look at how he has come through and made such an impact on that Kerry team. It's all. If it's a Kerry thing, that's their tradition, and they have been, you know, to be going without an All Ireland for as long as they are, just since 2014. That's a famine in their eyes, and that's a crime. And these lads have obviously come through and thought, like, no more, waiting no longer for an All Ireland. And I mean, Galway gave them a good run. It was a great final, but you just looked at the way they were. I think Sean Shea, it wasn't Sean Shea. I think it was Stephen O'Brien got that block in the first half. And like that set again, you know, if your forwards can play like your backs, if your forwards can put in the footwork that doesn't get you on the scoreboard, but they do it anyway. I mean, that's what wins All Irelands. And they've been coming through now. They're there, and they just seem to be really enjoying it. It's just, there's no pressure. There's no like, oh, do I have to do this? Do I have to sign that? Do I have to? I mean, I'll do all of it if it means that I get to play in Croke Park. I get to play in All Ireland finals every year. That seems to be, that's the air that they're giving off, and they just seem to be just really enjoying it. I think that's the only way that you can kind of sum it all up. And he's a very, you know, when he talks, David Clifford, he's really just calm. He takes his time with every answer, no rush. Everything just comes so naturally to him. And obviously he works really hard. This is not luck. You know, he has made his own luck. And I think, you know, barring a big injury, I don't think this is not a guy who's subject to form. I don't think this is a guy who dips at certain times of the year and then he might come go. I think he's just all the way along. He's just at the same line. He's just consistently brilliant.
Okay. I think we had
I lost you there. You're
there. Yeah. No, but
did you get all of my?
Yeah. No, I heard what you were saying. He definitely. Okay. It's interesting as well that before, you know, you mentioned Joe Canning. Like he's the only one that I'd ever compare David Clifford to when it comes to a player coming through from minor and everyone knowing this guy is going to take over. Like this guy has all the ability in the world to take over. And yeah, you're right. He definitely works hard. I mean, the biggest thing I've noticed about him in the last 3 years is that guy's bulked up. That guy's got bigger. Like because when he broke through first, like he was kind of lanky. And then like now he's a powerhouse. Like now he's, you know, he's a full forward in his own right. Like he can kick high ball into David Clifford now. Like, so yeah, there's no doubt he's putting in the work. He's always had the skill. He's always had the ability, but now it's like he just, Similar to, I think there was a quote about Michael Jordan in the Last Dance documentary. I think it was BJ Armstrong that said it. Was like he just stopped playing basketball and he just figured out how to win. And it's like David Clifford is almost going that way. Like he just wins now. Like pretty much everything that he does. And I think it'd be absolutely fascinating. I think the game is at his feet right now, and his stardom, I think, would be very interesting to see how far that takes him. But yeah, no, that video is quite wholesome to see. And looking forward to seeing more from Clifford. So that has been the wrap up here on Play on GAA. Sinead, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, thank you so much for giving me your time. And until the next one,